Hello again. I'm back with another clock. This one is a Hammond, which I found at a local thrift store, and it looked to me to be the oldest Hammond that I had ever seen. I was able to find it in my Hammond maintenance and repair guide. It's called the Hammond Cambridge. It's in a walnut case, and I know that Hammond started making his clocks in 1930, and from the looks of this one, I'm thinking this could be one from 1930. I've worked on quite a few Hammond clocks, but this one has a lot of features that I've never seen before, and I'll try to show some of them to you. First of all, it's a really large clock. One of the largest ones that I've come across, both in the size, in width and in depth. The other unusual thing is the back of it has a door that you usually would see with clocks that have chimes. And opening this up, you have to expect to see a pendulum and some chimes in here, but it's just the whole motor assembly. The other unusual thing is, instead of having a power cord coming out of here, there's a plug, and I do not have an extension cord with a small enough, female end to fit over this, so I haven't been able to plug it in to see if it runs. But it is not a self-starting clock. This is the set knob for the hands, and this is the spin and start knob for the second hand. And one thing I have noticed is that when I try to give this a turn, it's not doing anything. The second hand is really not moving. So the odds are, not only does this clock have what I call a frozen rotor, the rest of the gears must be pretty gunked up as well, because usually even when the rotor is frozen, the start knob will still function and spin, and you'll be able to see the second hand turn. So let me get this set up on my bench, and I'll start to take it apart and see what's going on with this one. What I have to do first is remove the clock mechanism from the case. And to do that, the whole movement is being held in with several screws around the edge here. So let me work on getting those out, and then I'll look to remove the whole mechanism. The screws are out, but I'm also going to have to take out these two in order to get the wire separated from the plug. I'm not sure yet how this is connected, but let me take these two out of there, and then I'll continue. Okay, they're both out. See what happens here. Well, quite an ornate dial, really very nice, and something fell out of here. Piece of plastic, probably from this plug. Here we go. I'm thinking this has to be unplugged somehow. More pieces are falling apart. Okay, give me a minute to take a closer look at this and figure out how I'm going to take it apart. So what I'm seeing is the wire is connected here just by two screws. This doesn't come off. The pieces that fell out looks to be an old dried up rubber grommet or washer. I'm not sure yet where this came from. But let's see if I can undo these wires from the screw here. There's one. Okay. Let me get the case out of the way. All right. Next up, have to remove this whole cover, and two nuts are holding that in, I think. But before I can do that, I'm most likely going to have to remove the hands. A clock this old, this may be a threaded second hand rather than friction grip, but let me take a closer look before I try to maneuver it off. It looks like this is a friction grip second hand, but before I even start to try to pry it off of here, I'm going to apply some of my WD-40 around it. I have found that these older clocks, it can be really difficult removing the hands. So I just spray some in a little cap, apply it around the top of it by the stem and underneath. And I'm going to let this soak in for a good half hour or so. Let it penetrate as much as possible. And then I'll see if I can remove the hands. It's been more than a half hour now. And let's give it a try. Definitely tight. I think I got it. All right. There's a small nut holding on the minute and hour hand. Let's see how easy that is. Okay. Not bad. There we go. And it's still kind of tight here, even with the nut off. There we go. And lastly, the hour hand. I want to protect the dial a little bit here. Got it. Okay, now I can remove this housing, which I think is separate from this plate, but first I have to remove the set knob. To do that, I grab the stem with my vice grip. Okay. And now these two nuts here. Now these are not tight at all. This little plate comes off. And hopefully this will just lift right off. There we go. There we go. Okay, first concern is these wires going to the coil here. They're very shaky. I have to be really careful not to break these off. I may have to reinforce it somehow. But this looks like the classic Hammond rotor. I'm sure it's frozen. I've opened up, cleaned out, and drained a lot of these. Here's another piece of that little rubber washer that came out. It probably sat somewhere on here, perhaps. I'll have to figure it out. But next, I'm just going to try to deal with tightening up these wires before I do anything else. Once I've done that, I'll proceed on removing the rotor. I've secured the wire with a bit of Gorilla Tape. It moves a little bit, but it's definitely tighter here. So next, I want to remove the rotor. And in general, these nuts just are not tight at all. See, now I can't rotate this output gear at all. This is frozen solid. What makes it easier with these rotors, there's a plug that is soldered over in position, and I can just remove the solder, get the plug out, and that'll let me get in my I use liquid wrench to clean out the old oil. I'll get started on that in a bit. But what I also have to do is take this apart so that I can clean up the gears that are in here. And in order to do that, I have to access this from the other side, which means I need to remove the dial. So let's see how easy that is. It seems to be secured here with sort of a riveted little plug, and that's a problem. So how am I going to get the dial off now? All right, time for me to take a much closer look at this before I do anything else. So once I figure out how to approach it, I will come back. Okay, so here's what I'm seeing. Number one is there's absolutely no way to remove this plate from this side. There are screws holding this in, and it has to be removed this way, which means the dial has to come off in order for me to access it. So what I'm thinking of doing is filing down, or with a Dremel drill type of a thing, filing down these rivets here. There's one at the 12 and at the 6, so that I can remove the dial. I really don't understand why they would have used this, and I'm thinking it might have been the last thing placed after the clock was fully assembled. But because there's these other holes holding it into the case when it gets screwed in, these really aren't even necessary. So it'll take a little bit of time for me to get these off, but once I've removed them, it should be pretty easy to get the dial off. So at that point, I will proceed. I filed down the rivets on either end, but I still couldn't get them out. I tried tapping them out. That didn't work. I ended up having to drill them out. And what's interesting is this is what one of them looks like. And it looks very much identical to the type of plug that's used to close up the rotor. And when I get this one out, I'll show you as a comparison. So for now, I can pick this plate up off of the dial. A lot of oil is on here, as well as on here. Let me clean all of this up. And then the next step, I'm going to want to access the gears here by removing this plate, just these 4 nuts. So let me clean everything up, and then I'll be ready to go with that. I've cleaned up this rim, the plate, the back of the dial, but just to show you, the dial really covered in oil here. Anyway, I'm going to clean the rest of this off, and I'll get started on removing all of this. I've cleaned up the dial, and I'm very pleased with how it's looking. And next, I'm going to remove the 4 nuts holding this plate to the gears that are underneath. Let's move this out of the way now. Okay, let me try to lift this straight up so I don't disturb the positioning of anything here. Okay, this plate has to come up as well. But what I'm going to do first is take a few photos of these gears in here in case anything gets knocked out of whack. I'll have a good record of how it goes back together. So let me work on that before I continue. Let me continue now trying to remove the second plate. Okay. Well, once again, a lot of greasy dirt on this. Once again, I'm going to take some photos, make sure I know how everything is positioned here before I continue. Now that I know how these gears are set up, I'll show you how they come apart. The ones on this plate are riveted in place, so they're not coming off. I'll probably clean this just by dropping the whole thing in an ultrasonic. I'll zoom in so you can see these better. But we have one here, here, there's a very small spring over here. This is the start knob, so I don't want to lose that. And to take the start knob off, I have to remove the end of it here, which should just slide off. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is set up my ultrasonic and get everything clean. And while that's happening, I'll begin working on opening up the rotor and cleaning out the old frozen, gunked up oil that's in here. I've shown how to remove the solder and the plug on these kind of rotors and then clean out the old oil and relubricate them on several of my other videos, so I'm not going to show that whole thing now. I'll just briefly explain what I'm going to do. You need a soldering gun. Remove the solder and the plug. This will then get filled with liquid wrench. It soaks for 24 hours. Remove it, then fill it with 3-in-1 oil, another 24 hours, and then once that's drained, just fill it with a little bit of synthetic clock oil. The plug goes back in, close it up with some more solder, and then it should be good to go. To do this, I like to set the rotor up in a clamp so it doesn't move around, plus this gets kind of warm. Anyway, I'm going to work on removing this next. I was able to remove the plug, came out of here, and when I said that the little rivets that we're holding in the dial look very much like the plug that goes in the rotor, I'll show you what I meant by that. This is what came out of the rotor, and this is the one that came out of the dial. And they're pretty much the same. The other thing I can point out is this warmed up enough from removing the solder that the oil on the inside loosened up a bit, where now I can actually turn the output gear. But when this is properly lubricated and you give this a spin, this should rotate on its own for about 20 seconds. Anyway, I'm going to proceed with adding in the liquid wrench, emptying it, 3-in-1 oil, etc. So when I come back, this should be completed and spinning freely. While the rotor continues to soak, I'm going to go ahead and reposition the gears. Let me zoom in for you here. Now, using some of the synthetic clock oil, I've lubricated the ends of all the pivots on the gears here, as well as the holes that are in the plates. And let's see, this goes here. And this one goes here. And I don't want to forget that spring, which I put in here. Here it is. Next, I have to reposition this plate, which is going to sit like this. If I can get it in. There we go. There it is. So what I have to do next is kind of tease the ends of the gears, the pivots, into all the little holes on the plates. Once they're in, then I'll be able to reposition this plate back over it and attach it with the 4 nuts, and then I can let this sit until I'm ready to continue on the rotor. What I've done is secured the plate with the 4 nuts, and I've also completed the work on the rotor, cleaning it all out, filling it with a little bit of my synthetic oil, replacing the plug and sealing it up with solder. What I want to work on next is seating the dial back over this, and what I'm finding is it wants to kind of slide around. So although I complained about it at the beginning, I'm going to replace those plugs that were here, and that's going to help keep this dial from moving on me as I go to seat the hands. So let me get those in position and then I'll continue. I also have to position this before putting those plugs back in, so it'll be looking like this. I placed the rivets back in to hold the dial to the back plate. They kept popping out, so I secured them with just a little piece of tape on either side. And what I want to do next is seat the rotor back into position. I can also remove this tape from here. So this goes, oh, and what I'd like to show is that now that it's been properly lubricated, when you give this a spin, it really goes for a good 10-15 seconds, if not longer. And that's what you're looking for when you try to repair one of these rotors. Come on. Okay, what I'm going to do next is reseat the hands. Now the minute hand only goes in one position, so I have to put that on. Let's see if I can find the spot. And then turn it to the 12. And then the hour hand. And again, with the minute. And secure this with the small nut. And finally, the second hand. Next, I have to put this housing back over it. Let's see, the wires get passed through here first. Come on. Trying to be gentle with it. There we go. Okay. I'm going to secure the plate with a couple more nuts. I'll put the set knob on, and at that point it would be ready to be placed back into the case. Okay, now the set knob. Very good. Now, normally this would go back into the case, but actually I have to do a lot of work in trying to restore the case. I'm going to put this aside and I'll show you what needs to be done with the case. On the back of it, you have this door. The hinge is missing a nail here. Other nails have moved up out of position. Those need to be tapped back into place, which really is no big deal. On the front of the case, you have this decorative scroll, which is loose in a couple of spots. You can see over here, coming away from the front of it, and the same thing on this side. So I have to glue that back down. But overall, considering it's a 90-plus-year-old clock, the case is in pretty good condition. So once I have glued this down, I will then clean whatever surface dirt is on here, and then look to restore it using my Howard's Restore Finish and my Howard's Feed and Wax to polish it up. And when I'm ready to use those two materials, I will come back. I've glued down the scroll, I've cleaned the wood. Now to go over the finish. And considering the age, this is in pretty good shape. You just wipe this on and then wipe it right off. And you can see the difference that it does. It really brings out a nice shine. And what's really nice about it is it hides a lot of these scuff mark and scratches. I'll show you. Really not bad at all. Anyway, I'm going to proceed through the whole clock like this. I'll follow that up with the wax polish, and then I'll be ready to put the clock back into the case. I've completed the staining and the waxing of the case. It didn't quite take away all the scuff marks here, but the front I think came out looking real good, and seeing as how this is what you're going to be looking at if it's up on a mantle, this should work out just fine. What I want to do next is place the clock mechanism back in here. First, I got to put in the glass. Let's turn this around a bit here. There we go. Now I just maneuver the clock back in here. Okay, what I have to work on next is securing the plate with all the screws around here, and that will take a few minutes, so let me work on that, and once that's done, I'll continue. Okay, I've got the clock back in the case. What I have to do next is attach the wires to the back of the plug. That'll take me a couple of minutes, so I'll work on that. Once that's done, I just have to attach the plug to the back of the case, and then I'll be ready to set it up and give it a test run. As you can see, everything's back together. I have it plugged in. Let me give the start knob a spin. And it's running. There you have it. The Hammond Cambridge. I believe it's from about 1930 or so. And I'm quite pleased with how this one came out. And I hope you enjoyed the video. And that pretty much wraps things up. Bye for now.